Okay. Welcome to the INDY's Orange County Candidate Forum. I'm Lisa Sorg, and I'm the editor of the INDY. Tonight we are at Flyleaf Books at 752 Martin Luther King Boulevard, and we are streaming live at www.indyweek.com. So if you're watching it online and you'd like to actually see these people in the flesh, they're lovely. So please come on down. We have 5 candidates this evening. We have 3 state legislative races and 1 Orange County Commissioner's race. We'll start from my left. We have running for House District 50, Democrat incumbent Greg Meyer. We have in House 56, Democrat incumbent Verla Insko. And in House Senate 23, Valerie Fouché. And she's also a Democratic incumbent. Then over here for Orange County Commissioner, District 1, which includes Chapel Hill and Carborough. We have to the far right, Mian Burrows, who's a Democrat running, and then Gary Kahn, who's the Republican candidate for that seat. We did actually invite 3 other candidates for the state legislative races, and they either declined or did not respond to our invitation. So we're just going to have the party anyway. Here, just so how people know this is going to work, and I sent this protocol to the candidates earlier. They have not seen the questions, but they do know the format, and that format is to keep everyone engaged in the forum. We will combine the commission and legislative candidates in the same round. We have, I think there'll be about 6 rounds, and this will last about an hour. So each person will receive 2 minutes for an opening statement. Then we will have a question, and you will have 1 minute to answer. Now, since the commission races actually have 2 people running for the same one, the first candidate will answer, the second candidate will answer, and then the first person will have a chance to rebut if he or she chooses. You guys have no one to rebut to, so you'll just chat. So we did have so you'll have 2 minutes closing remarks as well. And Billy Ball is our staff writer and an excellent timekeeper. He never misses a deadline. And he'll hold up signs when you're getting close to the time. And then about halfway through, Billy and I are going to change spots. So first of all, let's start with introductory statements for each legislative and commission candidates, and we're going to start with Greg at the end.
Good evening. My name is Greg Meyer, and for the last 16 years I was working in the Chapel Hill Carborough City School District. My wife is a teacher. She teaches for the Durham Public Schools. We have 3 children, 2 of whom attend Durham Public Schools, and 1 who went through Orange County Schools, Durham Tech, and now is at UNC Charlotte. So our family is deeply immersed in public education. Over the last few years, I became increasingly concerned about the direction that North Carolina was taking with regards to support for public education, which I believe is part of what made this state so great throughout the 20th century. And when Senator Ellie Kinnaird retired and Senator Fouché was appointed to replace her, the District 50 seat came open, and I sought appointment to the seat, basically making the case to people with the question, don't you think it would be good if there was someone who actually had worked in public education who was making decisions about what's happening in Raleigh. So my main issue is being interested, of course, in keeping our public schools strong and trying to make sure that every child in North Carolina gets an education that will help them for a 21st century workforce. I also believe that just sustaining strong public education from early childhood all the way through post-secondary education and adult education is key to sustaining the North Carolina economy. I'd be happy to talk about all kinds of other issues tonight, of which I'm learning as much as I am leading, and look forward to the service that I can provide to the state on all of those issues.
Thank you, Greg. Verla?
Thank you very much. I'm Verla Insko. I represent the 56th House District, which is all of Carborough down to the Chatham border and most of Chapel Hill and into the Hillsborough Township. I've lived in Chapel Hill since 1965, and I have seen an incredible growth in economic development and in progressive movements here in North Carolina since I've lived here. I feel like I've been part of that and have been proud to be part of it. I served on the Chapel Hill Carver Board of Education for 8 years and on the Orange County Board of Commissioners for 4 years before I ran for the General Assembly in 1996 to be seated in 1997, and I've served there since then. I thought that I would spend most of my time in education since I'm a former school teacher, but Health and Human Services had a vacancy. There was no leadership in that area at that time, and so I was asked to step into Health and Human Services, and since then I've spent a lot of time on Medicaid, health care, and early childhood education. I've also been very active in education and have been a big supporter of the university. Have seen the university grow and to be an economic engine for North Carolina through its research and innovation and entrepreneurship. And I'm very concerned about the cuts to education in North Carolina, especially to the university, where we could be losing one of our major economic industries. And we look forward to sharing some other ideas on other issues with you and answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Valerie?
Good evening. I am Valerie Fouché, and I am proud to serve the citizens of District 23 in the North Carolina Senate. I have been able to serve in this area for a number of years, 17 of them exact. I've served 7 years on the Chapel Hill Carver School Board, 8 years as an Orange County Commissioner, and the past 2 years in the General Assembly. I think that North Carolina is at a crossroads right now. We need to ensure that our investments in public education are not just adequate, but what we need to ensure that our students are able to compete nationally and globally. I don't believe that will happen if the current majority is allowed to continue to defund education. I think that as we look at what's happening in North Carolina as it relates to the country, we are now at the bottom as it relates to education funding. I want to return to the General Assembly to ensure that those investments are what they need to be. I think that we have an opportunity now to expand Medicaid, to make sure that we are taking care of our most vulnerable citizens and that we are not seeing hospitals in our state close. So again, thanks to the INDY for holding this debate. We'll probably have conversation, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mia, you go. Sure we go.
So first, I would also like to thank the INDY for this. This is the first forum that we've been involved in the general election, so this has been a great opportunity. So I want to tell y'all a little bit about myself and how I come to be in office and really looking to run for county commission. In both my professional work and in my electoral work, I have been very focused on helping children and youth achieve their potential. I was a legislative aide for a U.S. Congressman from Pennsylvania with responsibility for children's and women's issues. And then I worked over several years with national, state, and local nonprofits that were involved and particularly focused on teen pregnancy prevention. I have consulted with several nonprofits in the area with expanding beyond teen pregnancy to help kids avoid a path that would give them brushes with the law, and continue to focus again on also reproductive health as well with those nonprofits. I was elected to the Chapel Hill Carver School Board in 2007, and I have served as both vice chair and chair. So all that is to say, really to give you the background, that consistent with all that work on both sides of my life, my focus for county commission truly will be on promoting the policies that will help our most vulnerable citizens.
Okay. Gary?
Because this is working.
Yes.
Those who know me know that I'm not new to politics. I'm a former Chapel Hill Town Council candidate last November, and I decided to extend my campaign for county commissioner when Alice Gordon decided not to seek to retire from the county commissioner's job. I have been actively involved with Chapel Hill politics. I was a person seeking Penny Rich's vacancy in Chapel Hill when she got promoted, got elected to the Board of County Commissioners. I was one of the people who to seek the position, that obviously did not get it, and that enabled me to run for Chapel Hill Town Council. I'm not new to the Town Council. I've addressed several issues. It was the cell phone ban. I was very vocal on that. I was a very outspoken person in favor of it. The H incident, I was a very outspoken person on that. So basically, I'm one who knows what's going on in the town, and I want to extend my knowledge of Chapel Hill politics and Carrboro politics up on the county level. That's it.
Okay. We'll now begin the questions. We're going to start with Verla for the legislative race. Well, as I think one of you said in your opening remarks, the Democrats are not in power. They're very much in the minority in the legislature. So tell us how you propose to get anything done.
Let me just, I heard a comment earlier today from a Republican who was being interviewed, who said, oh, Democrats only have this tired message of income inequality and lack of jobs and a need to increase the minimum wage. It is really a tired old story. So I think that Democrats actually will not be able to accomplish a lot, but I think it's very important for us to actually propose something. And so I hope that we will be able to propose how we would return jobs to North Carolina. I would, first of all, I would restore the earned income tax credit. I would expand the community college training programs to coordinate with industry, and make some improvements in education for long-term job growth.
Okay. Valerie, same question.
The only thing I would add to what Representative Insko has said is that in any situation, there has to be a way to build coalitions. There has to be a way that, since I have had that opportunity and I have taken advantage of the opportunity to establish relationships with legislators on the other side. I would say that to some extent, I had some success. I was able to get a bill passed. Of course, Verla is used to that. I was not. But what it meant was that I had to establish a relationship, nurture that relationship, and work that relationship to get what I wanted.
Oh, Valerie, just a quick follow-up. What was the bill?
It was a bill for the town of Chapel Hill to expand its economic development opportunities. It was House Bill 305, and it is now session law, I think 2013-173.
Greg, since you're named after a baseball player, I'm going to throw you a curveball. Who do you think would be the next Speaker of the House, and what qualities are you looking for in a new Speaker?
I don't have speculation on who the next Speaker will be. We know that there are somewhere between 3 and 7 serious candidates. From the Democratic side of the aisle, I think that what we care about the most is that the Speaker runs the House in a fair way. We saw during the last session a lot of parliamentary procedure that was used to defeat Democratic amendments, and we saw a lot of backroom procedure that didn't give us a fair playing field. So for instance, when the House budget was introduced this year, it was sent out to us at 11:30 at night, and we were expected to start debating it at 1 o'clock the next day. I felt it was impossible to digest a 500-page piece of legislation and make an informed decision about what I should do the next day. Now, of course, the Republicans all knew what was in it because they'd been briefed on it before it was made public. So I support any candidate who would tell me that they're going to make a level playing field for both parties.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to the commission race. We had a coin flip earlier, and Mia won the coin flip and chose to be the receiving team. So Gary, you're going to kick. The first question is, hold on, sorry, I have it right here. If you could assess the county's economic development strategy, including the use of incentives, and tell us, assess whether you would support additional incentives and for what.
I would support additional incentives. Incentives have worked well in Chapel Hill overall, And I think that plan, that strategy that Chapel Hill used to get economic development on its way would be very good for the county as well.
Can you be more specific in areas that might need incentives?
Basically to decrease the tax base and try to increase business, more towards the businesses aspect and less on the residential at this point.
Okay. Leah, would you like to respond?
Sure. So the thing with incentives is that I think they have to be used judiciously. It's an issue that I would have to learn, or I will learn more about, and we'll be looking at in terms of the case, but the cases in which they'd be presented. I think the county has really been going in the right direction and has done. Certainly, it was a really big deal that the county, in partnership with the state, did land the Morinaga candy plant. Besides its candy, what's not to like?
And that's in Mebane, correct?
It's in Mebane, but it's in Orange County,
yeah.
which is really very important. And so, to some extent, the story will be told. We'll see how that goes, but I think landing that big fish will help with other things. And I also think in general with economic development, you have to look all up and down the scale in terms of large businesses, and certainly large, very large as that size, all the way down to small businesses. But that's something I look forward to learning more about and working on as we go forward.
Gary, did you want to?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Being very cautious has its good points, but since Chapel Hill has done this, I feel there won't be no need for it to actually analyze the situation and then to get a fully go-ahead support on that. That's right, this is me on.
Okay. So we're now going to turn to Valerie. You're going to get the first question. This is about, and full disclosure, it's self-serving for the media, but I would like to know how you feel about, as you know, certain legislative communication is not part of the Open Records Act. It's protected under attorney-client privilege. We would like to know, not just for the press, but for citizens, how do you feel about that kind of correspondence being protected, and would you support a more open records law for those correspondences?
I would. When I ran for the House seat, one of my platform goals was to have a more open and transparent government. And I was asked at a forum during that time, well, how do you plan to accomplish that? I didn't have an answer at that time. I was still learning. But I think that most of the folk with whom I work understand that in order for our constituents to be involved, they have to know. There were times when I didn't feel that I was getting communication that was open enough for me to even make a decision on a bill that was being passed. I read a particular bill at 11 o'clock before I went to sleep, and when I woke up and went to committee meeting at 8:30 the next day, that bill had changed. So I think that we need to ensure that the legislators and the constituents understand what's going on.
Bernie, same question.
Well, thanks. Actually, I'm happy to have an opportunity to respond. And I agree that we need more transparency. We need access to the information. I do think that our legal staff have a responsibility to keep the work that they do with a legislator private. So during the process, while a bill is being formed or while research is being done, I really don't have any problem with that. But part of the problem is that once the bill's done, or once it's brought immediately to the floor without that period of time where people have the opportunity to go back and look at how the decision got made and all the information that was available. So I think that there are certain reasons for that privilege at a certain point in the process.
And just as a follow-up, at what point in the process then should it become open?
Well, I think before any decision's made, before any debate is made, and that the public, the media especially, need to have access to that to get the information out to the general public, so the general public, if they come to hearings, will be well-informed citizens.
Greg, same question.
I think that first it's important just that all of us recognize that in today's world, our electronic communications probably aren't as private as we think they are, no matter what. So there's one element of this question, which is to simply say that given what we know about what's accessible, whether you want it to be or not, it's probably better to go with a rule of transparency than trying to hide. Practically, as a legislator, I would like the opportunity to work with legislative staff to figure out my ideas before they become public. You know, if I'm working on a bill, say, to provide additional access to reproductive and contraceptive care for women, I would like to be able to work out the details before my thoughts become public. But once I'm ready to negotiate that with other legislators, that would be the point at which I think people deserve to see how the sausage is made.
So if you were going to email, for example, Valerie and Verla, that would be open records to you because you would then have worked through your ideas, and at that point, why not know?
Correct. And I think most people in the General Assembly understand that if you're going to have that type of conversation with a colleague and you don't want it to be public record, you probably need to do it face-to-face behind closed doors anyhow. There's ample opportunity to do so.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to Commission. Mia, you're going to get the first question, then Gary, and then Mia again. Affordable housing has long been an issue in Orange County, particularly in Chapel Hill. So how do you work to offer affordable housing in the county, and please offer specific ideas? And for example, Chapel Hill does have inclusionary zoning, which, for those of you at home, that means that if a developer has more than 5 units, they have to provide, or are strongly encouraged to provide 15% of their other units for affordable housing. However, that's only yielded 230 units in 15 years. So Mia, tell us about affordable housing and what can Orange County do?
Well, as you point out, so far the bulk of the work really has been done by municipalities because I think that's where the bulk of the growth has been. In terms of what the county has done so far, it's really kind of worked around the edges in terms of, you know, smaller kinds of things to help folks stay in their houses, but not really gone with a broader policy. And so there's a couple of things I think about this, is that in fact it really has to be regional. One of the things we know from school system is our people move from place to place. So I think it has to be working closely with the municipalities. And in addition, we have to work with the nonprofits, like the Community Home Trust, which is the nonprofit that gets the most money from the county at this point, of all the nonprofits that are funded. That being just targeted at one level of income. However, we'll have to talk about it more because I'm out of time.
Gary, what are your thoughts on how more affordable housing can be created?
Well, everything Leah said is true, but if you follow up on what's going on in Chapel Hill and Carrboro, all their current plans have been very successful. They're very optimistic. So actually, the county can learn a lot by just seeing what Chapel Hill and Carrboro are doing. And I just want to add that to that.
And just to play devil's advocate, do you think 230 units in Chapel Hill over 15 years is successful? Either one of you can answer that.
No, that's not successful. It is a very difficult, tricky issue, and I don't think we've found the answers. Some of the things that Chapel Hill in particular had done over having developers include units within their development, at least in the ones I'm familiar with, it didn't really work. They found ways to support the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law.
Okay. Moving on back to the legislature. One thing that we were wondering is involving the economy. Many of you already touched on that in your opening remarks. And the inequality of wealth, that is, the gap is widening in the state. I mean, I know this is a broad question, but do you have very specific ways? I think some of you mentioned the EITC. What are ways where, twofold, one, where we can put more people back to work, and also, along with that, I know that there was some talk of tagging or pegging the minimum wage in North Carolina to the inflation. Could you talk about that as well? I know that's kind of two questions, but why don't we start with Greg and move down?
Let me start with the Earned Income Tax Credit, which the state has abolished. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a relatively complex policy matter to understand when you're trying to describe it to voters. So I've been thinking about this, and so basically what I think people should understand about it is instead of the state giving money to people directly in the form of some type of public assistance, the Earned Income Tax Credit allows you to earn back tax money based on how much you're working. And so if you're working more up to a threshold, you're actually going to benefit from having the Earned Income Tax Credit to help boost you out of poverty, basically. So it's a way to reward people for working rather than just receiving. And I think that it is one of the best public policy ways. In order for us to have those jobs, my time is almost up, but I would say that we are really going to have to consider how do we grow jobs in North Carolina, especially without a strong education system. We're having a hard time recruiting jobs here, and so we really need to support the entrepreneurial side to grow the jobs ourselves.
So I'll pick up a little bit on some of that. There are lots of jobs in North Carolina that are going unfilled. And those jobs are going unfilled because the workers don't have the skills. One thing that we could do would be to inventory those jobs and make sure that there are programs at community colleges that can train people to take those jobs, and to put in place a program where the government pays for that. Now, one of the things that Greg mentioned under Earned Income Tax Credit was taxes. And I think it's very important for us to start having that conversation about taxes. How do we support these essential services? Historically, the idea is that you actually pay for programs as you go. Nationally, we don't pay for our wars anymore. We just add them to the debt. But at the state level, we have a requirement for a balanced budget. So I think that we need to decide what essential programs are and develop a fair tax system. I would also, in addition to restoring the Earned Income Tax Credit, I would restore the progressive graduated state income tax.
Valerie, and if you could also talk about the minimum wage a little and
Well, certainly I think it's time that we increase the minimum wage and that we do tag it to the consumer price index. But it seems to me that we should also look at ways to enhance what we already have. We know that there's, connected with the expansion of Medicaid, about 23,000 jobs. In those situations where we know we can benefit from bringing industry or bringing, again, expanding Medicaid, that's something we should do. I think that, as Verla said, if we're talking about recruiting industry to North Carolina, we have to ensure that North Carolina residents are prepared and skilled for whatever labor we're bringing here. And I think that when we talk about our education system, we're talking about community colleges, we're talking about our colleges and universities, but we want to ensure that people in North Carolina are prepared for jobs that can come. And we can't do that unless we know that our workforce is skilled.
okay. So let's see here. We're going to go back to the commission, and Gary, you're going to get the question first. There was a report issued by the ACLU, I think it was about 6 or 8 weeks ago, about the militarization of local law enforcement agencies. And in that, while the law enforcement agencies specifically were not mentioned, we do know that somewhere in Orange County we have an armored vehicle and we have some other military hardware. So my question for you and Mia is, would you support revealing what the Orange County Sheriff's Office has received from the Department of Defense and their reason for accepting it?
Yes, I would. This came up on orangepolitics.org recently, and on it I mentioned that when the 8th building first happened, I approved of the police action, and I brought out this, I think we need to reconsider it, so I definitely would in favor of reconsidering this on releasing what we have and is it being used, and do we really need this stuff? You know, from what I heard, many times Chapel Hill said we don't need this, and it says you got it, it's yours, you know, so they're stuck with it at this point, you know, whether you like it or not. They can't get rid of it so fast, you know, unless they give it back to the Army or something, but they're stuck with their equipment right now.
Okay, and pull the mic a little closer.
Yes, I would absolutely believe that we should be public about that. It's impossible for me to believe there's a national security reason to keep it secret what kind of military equipment is in Orange County. My understanding was that some of it was that they were heavy trucks, and I don't know the military vehicle vocabulary, but that they were using to help clear after the big ice storm, and perhaps that's appropriate. It probably is appropriate, but there's no reason not to have, and that I could see that you would not release what that information is.
Gary, did you have anything to add? No. Okay. Going back to the legislature, and we'll start with Valerie. Oh, it's Verla's turn? Okay. Verla, you're on the hot seat. This actually, when I first moved to North Carolina, I must say I was confused by the lack of what we know as home rule, meaning that local governments have to get permission from the state to practically put up a stop sign. I mean, it's not quite that bad. But could you talk, and in this last session, we've seen local governments be stripped of more and more of their power. Local governments cannot stop fracking, it's my understanding. They can oppose it symbolically, but they can't actually tell frackers they can't come to their county. Airports have been taken away, water systems. So could you talk a little bit about what the chances are that, we'll just call it home rule, could be instated at some point, or how do we combat that?
Well, we haven't had home rule because we don't allow counties or cities to impose taxes without the approval of the General Assembly. But counties are really a creation of the General Assembly. They were created in order to be able to deliver human services, like school boards, the local school board districts. That's a creation of the General Assembly in order to allow the schools to have a local entity where they know the people, and that's the idea behind counties. So counties deliver health care, social services, and a lot of other programs that are funded by the federal government through the state that go down to the county. I'm very much opposed to taking away the authority of counties to make decisions over their own utilities, and I would hope that we would stop interfering in taking away what little home rule they do have.
And we'll go to Greg and then to Valerie.
You know, this is really only an issue when the ideology of people in the General Assembly gets in the way of pragmatism of running municipalities and counties. And I'll give you an example of the way the ideology comes out in the General Assembly. So during the short session, one of the bills that we heard was to take away the town of Boone's extraterritorial jurisdiction. So without getting into what an ETJ, an extraterritorial jurisdiction is, I'll just tell you that the Republican senator who presented this bill in the House said that the problem was that the town of Boone was an oppressive tyranny, and we needed to take away their ability to be an oppressive tyranny. And I was quite amused that he found no irony in asking the state legislature to take away the town's ability to make their own rules.
You can't make this up.
You can't make it up, and it's hard for me to add anything to what's been said. But I do hope that as we move forward, that we don't move to continue to take away local jurisdictions' ability to serve the people who are closest to them. I think that having served as a school board member and as a commissioner, I think one of the things that I learned in both cases is that all politics is local, and that people who serve locally best understand what the needs of local jurisdictions are.
Okay. So moving on back to the commissioners, and Mia gets it first this time. Orange County, actually I think I'd like to go to listing your top 3 priorities for the county.
Okay. So, along the lines of what I talked about in terms of what my background is, my priorities are absolutely making sure that we continue our very, very strong education system, not just K-12, but also the community college that we now have here. For all the reasons we've talked about in terms of jobs and labor and all those kinds of things. So, and I certainly think my years on the school board prepare me to assist with that. Human services are huge. It's actually, when you combine education and human services, it's quite it's well over half the county's budget, although those issues don't get talked about primarily because of the people that are served aren't always the most vocal. And I do believe that we have to figure out how to pay for that, if at all possible, without raising property taxes, not because I'm pandering, but because I don't want to price people out of the county who are really having a hard time staying here now. But in order to have those values, and to continue to support what we value here, we need to diversify our tax base to pay for it.
Here?
My three priorities are education, of course, responsible budgeting, and economic developing. What Mia had said is true, but the truth of the matter is, the current board of commissioners, they say they want to help all these people, but actually the policies such as raising taxes, the people that they really want to help, they're actually forcing them to leave the county, so actually it's counterproductive. We need a responsive form of budgeting, set our priorities straight. And when I was running for Chapel Hill Town Council, I was a big in favor of priority budgeting, and I think that's what we should be doing on a countywide level. Get our priorities straight, to stop quit taxing the people, and that's where my economic development plan comes in for that, encouraging more businesses.
So, just as a quick follow-up, if you're not going to raise taxes, then where does the revenue come from?
Well, you heard, like I said, actually you have to go line by line, cut unnecessary services and keep those essential services. I know, I asked one of the former county manager before he I said, what would your idea be about possibly giving less to the charity groups and focus more on paying for other essential?
Would you like to respond?
So, those groups serve incredibly important needs. They feed the hungry. They give children mentors, children whose families may not be intact. They do any number of things. Housing, I mentioned Community Home Trust. They're helping. Those charities and the funding that they get from the county are absolutely critical. And until the counties or the towns can fill the roles that those nonprofits are playing for our people, I do not think we should cut them. I'm not going to check my brain at the door and say that every single nonprofit deserves funding. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that the ones that we've been funding for the most part are making a difference for people in Orange County.
Well, and I think it's probably worth noting that some conservatives think that the government should do less and private enterprise should do more. So at some point you have to say, well, if we take money away from private enterprise, then who's left? Moving to the legislature, and since we're on the topic of education, which is huge, you have the K through 12 portion and you have the community college higher ed portion. Huge cuts made, teachers' assistants. I mean, really the teacher raises were laughable. So where do you even begin to restore integrity to the public education system?
Probably my turn now, and I was a part of that group that would not have let that happen. Let me just say that I think that when we talk about priorities, then that's where our funds should go. If education is truly a priority in North Carolina, and I believe it is, then we should make sure that it is funded correctly. When we talk about ensuring that our children are getting the best education, then it means that they need to have the best teachers. If we are not funding them properly, then we lose them. If we don't show them respect, then they leave North Carolina. And there was a survey that just came out today that put North Carolina at 50. How will we be able to recruit the best teachers if there's no reason for the best teachers to come to North Carolina? And what does that say about our investment in what we believe is a priority? So I think that if we're talking about what should really happen to education, we should determine where education is in our list of priorities and then fund it, and then move to fund other situations based on what is left understanding what our revenue projections are.
Is that my question too?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do disagree a little bit. I agree that education is a top priority of government. I also agree that it's really good to lay out your priorities and decide that you're going to fund them. But we are all naive if we think that we can fund all of our essential priorities with the revenue that's currently available. We are cutting. We're not just cutting waste. I'm opposed to waste. I don't want any of my tax dollars to go to waste or fraud. But we have a priority in early education. We have a priority in K through 12. We have got to fund our university system, and we've got to fund healthcare. Healthcare education is an essential service. It's a public good, and healthcare is a public good and essential service. And we're not going to have a strong economy if we don't have a good education system, or if we don't have healthy people.
And Greg,
And so I would, sorry,
15
so I've
seconds
got
left.
15 seconds. That brings me right back to what I said before several times. We've got to have that conversation about taxes. What is fair taxes? If we can agree on what we want to fund, and I think we could have that conversation, then the next step would be to agree on how you pay for it.
And Greg, in addition to that question, if you'd like to, and we'll come back around to this in a subsequent round, but I'd like to ask you to address the idea of vouchers and what the case for charters are and what the case against is. If that could be your question, and then we'll come back around.
Sure. So I believe that vouchers are unconstitutional on the face because the state constitution prohibits spending public tax dollars on a private good. So you can't spend it on a private school. You can't give your tax dollars to a private school. So I don't know that eventually that the state Supreme Court is going to agree with me on that, but that would be my belief. I also think that vouchers are just bad policy because we depend on public schools to be good for all people, and the existing voucher plan doesn't even help the people.
And Valerie and Berla, we'll come back to that if you want to answer it in a second. County Commission, Gary, you have the first question in this round. This actually, I was looking at the Orange County Commission minutes recently, and someone had requested, someone from the public had requested eliminating fluoride from the drinking water. Just gonna ask, this is a public concern.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the guy who asked that question.
Okay.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Is that a reasonable request? And if you think it is, what would it take to do that?
Let me tell you what actually happened on that meeting. Mr. O'Leary, who's a regular at the county commissioner meetings, came with a group of people who were addressing the issues. And basically, the county commissioners were anxious listening to him. They said, "We have nothing to do with that. Go, we'll petition it, but you gotta put your complaint to the water commission, Ashwa, And basically, that's what it was left off. But it is a concern. I personally feel that fluoridated water. I grew up with fluoridated water. And basically, I think there's a positive aspect of it. So I kind of disagreed with him making it an issue, but he did make it an issue, and they forwarded it to the proper authorities to investigate it.
Okay, Mia, how many cavities do you have first?
Way too many. Yeah. So yes, this is OWASA's job to do it, and I would strongly advocate that OWASA keep fluoride in the water. It's just, it makes a huge difference. Public service announcement, my father lost all his teeth by the time he was 45, no fluoride, I have my teeth, so therefore, with that anecdotal evidence, I feel very strongly about this issue.
Okay, we're gonna stay with the commissioners for just a second. Billy, did you want to switch with me, or? Okay. Let me do one more for the commissioners, and I'll come back. You guys drink some water. It's not fluoridated.
Good question.
Orange County's land use plan, Orange County's got this huge urban and rural divide. It's a very complicated county. So in terms of what do you think some of the most pressing issues are regarding land use? I remember when there was a huge shopping center plan for that I-85, I-40 split, the Buckhorn.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that people, in the rural buffer feel very strongly about protecting their way of life. So how do you navigate and negotiate all those competing interests?
you negotiate. That's exactly the operative word, really, when you're thinking about it. So the way we're set right now, with the municipalities, being able to develop and increase their density, as they have been in many cases. We have that, then we have the rural buffer, which I think had several purposes, but basically it's there, it has done one job very well, which is to encourage density, which is good for transit and environment and those things. And then you have the rural area. And my view is that over time, those are plans that have been very good for this time being. I support the integrity of the rural buffer. I do believe that there could be some additional agricultural uses, which the multiple bodies are looking at right now, and that over time it has to be flexible. I mean, there will be a time. It's making me nervous because I'm out of time, but I'll finish this thought and it kills me. That particularly the areas where they're talking about economic development, I think we need it. We will need to have some support of that over time to be able to fund the things that we want to fund here in this county.
Okay, Gary, tell us your thoughts on land use.
Land use. I believe you gotta take land use on one issue at a time. I think you can't generalize it. Basically, I did real estate, and it basically boils down to location, location. And I think that's what it boils down to. Whether you want a business there, you want a house there, you want to build a shopping center, it has to basically comes down to location, land use, and what you want to do with it. There are some aspects where some people in the Chapel Hill community think we don't want that there. It's not proper to build it there, and that's a lot of controversy going on over that. So it actually has to be on an individual basis, property basis. So let the community decide, and along with the government decide what they want to, how they want to handle the land use.
But if it's a case-by-case basis, there also are things such as a comprehensive land use plan, which then tries to have guidelines so that you don't have to go through that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why Chapel Hill has developed a form-based coding, and I think maybe in some ways that could be properly used probably on a county-wide level too. I'm very pro, form-based coding.
Could you explain what that is for people who
Well,
live in the wonky world?
form-based coding is just pretty much a set of written guidelines that, these are the guidelines that the developer or the county must, or the city must follow, and it varies from, an agreement. It's sort of like a pre-agreement that they have with the developer, what they're gonna do with that land and how they're gonna develop it. And how the size of the building is, whether we want retail there or, housing there or that kind of thing, the current multiple use that's going on.
Okay. May you get a chance to, did I start with you?
You did.
I did, okay.
You're right.
Where's the bar?
That's all I was saying.
Did you want to rebut it all?
No, I don't have a rebuttal for that.
Okay. Billy, we'll take one break, and Billy is going to ask a few questions so that I can go to the bar. No, I'm really, I want to keep time. And so Billy Ball, our staff writer, who lives in Orange County, is going to ask a few questions. It's 10 of 8, and we're going to be going here for about another 15 minutes. So we're starting with the legislature, Billy, and here are some of the things that have not been covered. And you can just, I'm sorry, you can go through here, or you can here.
Okay.
Use my timer. Thank you.
So let me know when you're ready to time, and I'll start.
Go ahead and ask the question.
Okay.
And we're starting with the legislature.
Okay. Let's see. Between the coal ash spill in Eden, fracking, and turmoil in the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources this year, there are a lot of environmentalists who might say that 2014 has not been a great year. What are your top priorities as it relates to environmental concerns? And I believe that we're starting with Greg.
I would agree with those environmentalists. This was not a great year for the environment. On fracking, the General Assembly turned over the entire rules-making process to the Mining and Energy Commission. Once they create rules, they won't even come back to us for review. You can guess who's on the Mining and Energy Commission, and you can guess what kind of rules they'll make up. On coal ash, the coal ash bill included no pay provision to say who would pay for the cleanup of the coal ash ponds. And when we asked on the floor why wasn't there a pay provision, we were told that it was because if there was, it would have killed the bill and not made it through this year. Well, you can guess who they didn't want to hear about how it's going to be paid for. They didn't want voters to hear in an election year that you're going to have to pay the bill for the coal ash spill. And so I would hope that different leadership in the General Assembly would make sure that voters and ratepayers don't pay the majority of the coal ash bill. And I introduced an amendment that would have pushed for Duke to pay for the coal ash bill, but that amendment was shot down by the Republicans.
Okay. Barbara, same question?
Well, one of my concerns, in addition to what Greg's mentioned, is the decimation of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, that it was always, I think, underfunded. For example, we pass good bills, but then we don't fund the monitors or the inspectors to enforce the bills. And so in Orange County, we have a lot of sedimentation buildup in Eastwood Lake because we don't have enough sedimentation control, because we don't actually hire the people to make sure that the developers are following the law. So I think that we have our environment, a good environment, a clean environment, and is essential to our economic development. It's part of our base. It's one reason people come here. The businesses come here because, not just because of our educated workforce and our low taxes, but they come here for the environment and for the arts too. So I would say that we need to restore Diener to a really high functioning department.
I agree with everything that's been said, particularly the last thing that Verla said, but I think we also need to keep in mind that with what happened with Duke Power and the coal ash situation is that that bill does not ensure that every pond is going to be cleaned. There is a possibility that every other pond, other than the 4 ponds that were listed in that bill, will probably end up being capped in place. And we know that there are already things going on underneath right now, and there is no assurance that we're going to take care of that. With fracking, as we talked about, local jurisdictions having the ability to determine what happens inside of their confines, again, with forced pooling and fracking, we are imposing on the property rights of people who may not want their property fracked. If indeed your neighbors are okay with it, but you're not, and your property is between those 2 neighbors, then forced pooling is going to ensure that your property is fracked as well. So again, I think that as we move forward, we need to ensure that we are protecting our residents as it relates to their property, as it relates to clean air and clean water.
Okay, we're going to move to the county commissioners race. And I believe, are we starting with Mia? I'm trying to remember which one. Gary. All right, Gary. So the at-large district system for Orange County commissioners has been in place since 2006. The idea at the time was to engage more people from the rural parts of the county. Can you assess how you think the redistricting has worked?
Based on the old system, I think that the way they have it now, that they have districts now, I think that, because from what I understand, under the old system was the first 4 people who got the most votes won, and unfortunately people said we were basically going from Chapel Hill, Scarborough, so it came to be the necessary step to do that, so I think it's worked out well overall.
Me? Same question.
So I think you have to look at results, and in fact, at the moment, 4 out of the 7 commissioners come from outside of the municipalities. So what I don't know, and in fact you could sneak a question over Senator Fouché about, is how that compares to what we had before. I can't speak to that, but what I do see now is that municipalities, as I say, and the rural areas as well. So I feel like it has, at the moment it appears to be working.
Good, would you like to help with the vote? Okay. All right, go back to the legislature. All right, and we're going to start this time with Verla, I believe. Okay. Let's see. So traditionally, the state senate has been the firewall during the budget season for the state's university system. Do you think the system is getting adequate funding at this point? And do you support the effort to cap financial aid at the universities?
The university's not getting adequate funding. We already have a lot of evidence that some of our highest paid and most valuable research faculty are being recruited away by other universities and actively recruited away. And not only do they take they go, but they take their grant with them, and they take their graduate students, and they take their research project. And that is actually where a lot of our startups come from. We have hundreds of startups at the university every year that actually develop into big businesses. Quintiles is an example of a company that started here. So we really have to. There was a decision made to fund our universities to help drive the economy of the state, and we need to follow through with that. And the other part of the question was.
Do you think it says do you support the effort?
No, it's very important for us to keep tuition low and for us to have adequate student aid if we raise tuition. I'm actually opposed to raising the tuition. I think our Constitution requires us to allow students to go to the university free as far as practicable. And once again, that brings us back to the fact that we only pay, the state only funds the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill 17% of its budget. There's no reason why we shouldn't be putting more tax dollars into that institution. It is a state, it's a public university, and it should have public support.
Representative Fucci.
I don't know that there's anything I can add to that. I agree with everything that was said.
Okay, great.
I'd just say, let's look at this idea of capping financial aid. What's the point of this? Why would someone express they think it's a good idea to cap financial aid? To say to kids, well, we're going to pay for some kids to go, but your family, we're not going to give you enough to go. Your family should have worked harder so that you could have afforded it. I mean, it's just insulting. We know that this is the university here in Chapel Hill has been considered the university of the people. We know the university system has helped millions of kids move out of poverty over the course of more than 100 years in North Carolina. And there's absolutely no reason why we should do something that heartless to the young people of the next generation.
Okay. We're going to turn back to the commissioner race. This time we're starting with Mia. Orange County is long known for its top flight services. It's also known for having one of the highest tax rates in the state. Property tax service. As a county commissioner, how do you balance that demand for those services against the increase of property tax rates?
You go around it by trying to diversify your tax base is really ultimately, and that is a long-term solution. That doesn't happen overnight, but if you increase sales tax and you increase commercial property tax, that's the I think the long-term thing to do. You have to make choices. That's what elected officials do. The easy questions get sorted out by the staff and you pass them on consent, but you have to we are elected to make the hard decisions, and as I think I've made fairly clear, I feel pretty strongly that we need to be taking care of our people. We need to do it intelligently. We need, if there's new programs, for example, like the poverty program that the director of the health department is looking at, you need to look at it in an analytical eye. But in the end, those are really important services. So I will lean towards. I will err in the direction of supporting those kinds of things. However, I do think it's very important that we are always mindful of how we can diversify the tax base in order that we not price people out of the county.
Tax diversification, is fine, but again, the previous policy was the people that you really want to help, you're hurting them at the same time by increasing their taxes, their property taxes, which is forcing them to leave. So actually, it's an issue that we want to help these people, yet at the same time, we're forcing them to leave the county. I mean, there has to be an alternative solution. That alternative solution is basically go line by line, decide what we want to fund and what we don't want to fund. And I think over the past several years, politicians in Chapel Hill as well as Carrboro and on the county level have not done that. And I think it's time for a change. Let's take a approach, a way of keeping people here and helping them at the same time, you know. And that's basically all I have to say.
Okay, Mia, you going on for the bubble? Okay, so we've got one more question each on the legislature and the county commissioner side, and then we're gonna move to some 2-minute closing statements. All right, so this time we're gonna be starting with Senator Fushi. All right, so this is a fun one. What principled stand would you take that you know could lose you votes? Yeah, you're lucky they got that one first.
Wow. I think that the only principled stand that I think I would take that may lose some votes is probably a vote that I would take that those folk wouldn't vote for me anyway. I think that it would probably be marriage equality that I am for, and I would vote for it. I would help sponsor or sponsor a bill for it. I would imagine that any vote that I would lose for that, I probably didn't get that vote before.
Well, I was going to say that I think we're really fortunate to live in a town where our value system is pretty consistent with our people who vote for us. This is an education community. I have taken some votes that I was sorry that I took. I don't know that I voted for the video poker, and I think I probably would lose some votes over that. I voted for it because it was a caucus vote, and that's the only time I have ever voted for a caucus position that I felt uncomfortable with. Generally, our caucus doesn't require us to vote. They just say, please let us know if you can't vote with this. So I guess that one would be the best example I can come up with. I'm sorry. Sorry I voted for video poker. Mistake.
My district does not include most of the municipalities. I only have a couple of precincts in Chapel Hill, none of Carrboro, none of Hillsborough, none of the Durham city limits. So I have a lot of the rural area, and that means my district is not quite the same as Representative Insco's district, which is most of Chapel Hill and Carrboro and Hillsborough. So I think a lot about values questions, but there are certain times in the legislature where you have to just make a vote based on what your personal values are. And one that came up this year was a school prayer bill. And there were many Democrats I knew who were going to vote for it because we had talked about it in caucus. And basically they said, this is mostly a harmless bill, and the Republicans really worked with us in trying to negotiate something that a lot of us could support. And so as a goodwill gesture, we're going to vote to support this bill. But I personally could not support that bill. And when we cast the votes and the tally comes up on the big board, there were only 9 people who voted against that bill. And I was really surprised that I was one of only 9 who voted against. But I knew if I would have voted any other way, the vote that I would have lost would have been my wife's. And so it's just sometimes where you have to do what you believe in, and that was one.
What was the bill, what was the guts of the bill?
It's a bill that essentially makes it possible for teachers who want to join with students in a student-initiated school prayer to do so.
Okay, back to the commissioners for one last question. Gary, we'll start with you. How should Orange County, this is a popular topic the last few years, how should Orange County deal with its ongoing landfill and waste reduction issues? Also, it's a 2-part question. How should it deal with its rural curbside recycling?
They recently closed the landfill. They all seem to be happy about that over in Rogers Road area. And in the process of right now of giving the compensation that the community wanted along with the community center and sewers, debating how they're going to pay for the sewer right now between Carrboro and Chapel Hill and the county, and they're all thinking when they're going to put their, get this together to actually fund. It's not the basic funding of it, to get it all done at the same time. There's a debate going on right now. It's now that we close the landfill, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna open up transfer stations? Are we gonna ship our garbage to Durham? Are we gonna?
So you can write a thesis on that question, but that's our, but since we're not doing a survey this year, I'll do my best to get this in 1 minute.
Well, you can if you want to, just let it right.
Just when I have to. Okay, so I will try to hit on sort of the highlights. Rogers Road, I'm happy, that process seems to be coming along. The county seems to finally have gotten past a little bit of an obstacle in terms of the EPA complaint that seems to be moving on, and they've applied for community development block grant funds to help them pay for that. I understand it's a little bit of a long shot, but that's just one more thing. And certainly I will support paying for the county's the county's share to take care of the needs and particularly the sewer. So that's one thing. The second thing is on the rural recycling, the solid waste advisory group with a clever acronym SWAG. Apparently, just last Friday, I had learned that there's a technical correction, thank you legislators if you know anything about this, that changes the way the fees can be charged to something called availability, which is by a user as opposed to by a property, so that you get rid of that one problem of charging a property that doesn't have anything on it. You would no longer have to charge them a recycling fee because obviously they're not producing it. So that really could be, I think that's a game changer, and I think we'll get them moving forward on that. I think I'll save, I'm going to answer the principal stand question in my closing statement, so that's a related issue. But I'll move on from here.
Gary, you have a bottom?
Mia just elaborated on what I didn't have time to say, so I have nothing else to say.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to the closing statements. You have 2 minutes to wrap it up, and we'll start with Greg.
Tonight I'm just reflecting on what does our state want, and I think that our core values, we're people who want opportunity, we want equality, and we want fairness. We want all of those things to build into prosperity, and I'll go back to what I started with, which is that I think that the place that we depend as North Carolinians to create opportunity, to build our prosperity is our public schools. And that, to me, that is the most important issue for the legislature to tackle. And I want to be one of the people that's there working on that because I've spent my career in public schools. I depend on it for my children. And I think that the voice of people who have been in the trenches needs to be heard on that issue.
Representative Ensko.
Well, thank you for having this forum again and for the opportunity. I think I'm going to continue with my opening statement, and that is that we can go to the General Assembly and file individual bills and be engaged in specific issues as they come up, but I hope that the House Democratic Caucus this year will actually take the initiative and be for something too, not as a program. Would we submit a sample budget, an outline of a sample budget? Would we discuss how we would fund that budget? Would we outline where, if we were going to cut tax credits, would we cut tax credits in order to come up with some of that funding? And so I'd like to see us be for something and not just against the Republican positions. Republicans actually think have made quite a bit of progress re-evaluating their position on education. And so I think one of the things that we can do by being for things is helping to educate the other side about these issues that they haven't been familiar with for a long time. So that would be one thing I'd like to work on this year.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for having this discussion for us. I would like to say that it has indeed been an honor for me to serve in the General Assembly, and I want to return to serve again. I want to return so that I can be a part of what brings North Carolina back to what North Carolina used to be. We've talked about education a lot tonight, and I think all of us understand that education is very important in North Carolina, but also important is the health of our citizens. And so I think that we need to ensure that whatever we can do for our most vulnerable people, that we do it. And we do that by expanding Medicaid. We also need to ensure that North Carolina our environment is protected. And so we have an opportunity to, again, as been said earlier, to be for something. And I think that the three of us have shown that we are for education, that we are for equality, and that we are for the environment. And so I believe if you return us, you will see that we will take a stand on all of those issues.
Thank you. Okay, back to the county commissioner's closing statement. Leah.
So I think I've made it clear in my answers to several questions that where my priorities lie. Keeping education strong, serving the least of these through our human services. And that those are my priorities, and the way I want to get there is to continue to really focus on diversifying the tax base. I'll learn lots more about how we're going to do that as I hopefully will serve. This is a period of time where I've been reflecting on the benefits of having been on the school board, and there are two things that I think are really critical. One of which is through the tutelage, actually, of some of the folks on the other side of the dais, I have learned how important it is to talk about race and class comfortably in our community. We are a progressive community, but we still have a lot of things to work through and learn about, and a lot of that comes to fore with the schools, but those issues still cut at the county's level. The Rogers Road issue being a good example. The other thing, and I know Verla and Valerie will back me up on this one, you get to be tough as nails when you've been on a school board and you've had to go through a redistricting, particularly when you've been the chair. I believe that if there's anything that will allow me to take principal stands on things like maybe a solid waste transfer station siting, those kinds of things, I believe school board is prepared to make those decisions, to listen to all the folks, get all the input, educate, ask the questions, but then make a decision and move on. I believe I'm prepared to do that if the citizens of Orange County choose to elect me as a county commissioner.
Gary, closing statement.
I have one thing to say. I ran for Chapel Hill Town Council last year, and one of the responses I got very well, are you a Democrat or Republican? And I said, well, it's supposed to be nonpartisan, so what difference does it make? Blah, 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 blah. So I'm not going to take that with her. I happen to be an independent who's running as a Republican. Reason is because if I would have ran in the primary, I would have lost to my opponent here. And so basically it comes down to, if you feel the way I feel about the issues, what's going on right now, and you want change, I think I'm the perfect person to elect, because I have worked with everybody on the city level, Carrboro, Chapel Hill, and on the board, county commissioners. So actually I think I'm the most qualified, to be honest with you. And I hope you're independent enough to put party aside and vote for the independent who really represents your views and elect that person. That's what I have to say.
Okay. All right, that's all of our questions. We'd like to thank all of the candidates for coming out, and thank you for your answers. I'd like to thank everyone who came out to watch, and also anyone who's watching us through the magic of computers. Thanks for coming. You have a great night. Lisa, is there anything else you want to say?
Thanks much.
All right, thanks, guys.